Welcome to Tomo Talks. Today we're here with Randy Ross, a political figurehead in Orlando, and we're going to talk about political and personal identity and what it means in politics. Stay tuned. Randy Ross, thank you for joining me on Tomo Talks. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, I couldn't help but notice right away the pin. Love it. I have been a Trump supporter. I'm open about it on social media, but I really kind of put myself a little bit in the middle. I'm fiscally conservative and kind of socially right in the middle.
Right.
So I may lean one side or the other. I'm probably more libertarian than anything. But I have known of you for years on social media.
Yeah, that could be a good thing or a bad thing.
It's a good thing. I love following you on social media. You are a very interesting person. You put out a lot of very good information.
Thanks.
And you're somewhat of an anomaly in politics.
Sure.
And I think people will discover that. If you could just kind of give me a little bit of background, where you came from, who you are, what you're doing in politics. I know you've run for office, and if you just go on your social media, you wear and have worn many hats. So if you can just give me a little background on that.
Well, I first landed in Orlando in 1987. I did my internship at Disney, and I knew I wanted to come back here. I was from Indiana, and I thought, well, there's gay people at Disney World. I mean, there's got to be gay people in Orlando, because I knew, but I hadn't come out yet. I didn't come out until I was 36. So by the time I came out in 2002, I was still a Republican at that time, and I'd gotten some pressure from the LGBT community, where you can't possibly be gay and be a conservative. And so I kind of went through the motions there for a few years, where I was, doing the whole thing of coming out. I was going to the clubs and having fun. But in the back of my mind, I kind of knew where I was. So back around 2013 or 14, I came back to the Republican Party and literally went from being like one of the number two, I think Watermark had said, one of the most influential gay people, to one of the most hated, because in 2015, I became the Trump chairperson, which was not easy. I mean, people don't realize that even the Republican Party of Orange County did not want us to organize in 2015. And so I really went and pressured at the time. Pressure is the wrong word. I really bugged Joe Gruters, who's the chairman of the Republican Party of Florida. At the time, he was a state house representative, but he was the co-chair for the state. And he didn't know me from Adam, and I kept calling. And one day he took my call, and we had like what I would say maybe a 30-minute discussion. And he goes, well, let me give the chairman of Orange County a call and see if they'll let you organize. And at that point, this is when they're talking Cruz and Rubio. They weren't really talking to them. Trump was a joke. When Trump came down the escalator, and I believe it was July of 2015, I was on board at least to get, to vote for him. And so a local reporter had sent me an article and said, they're looking for chairman in all 67 counties. You should apply for this. And so I did. And the irony is that I walked into the office one day of the Orange County Republican Executive Committee, and there's a really nice lady sitting there. And I was like, why aren't you guys returning my phone calls? I had just come from working out, so I was all sweaty. And, not like you. I don't work out quite like you do. You're much more intense.
You're in extremely good shape. Let's just make that clear.
So I walk in, and she says, can you sit down for a second? And she hands me this manila folder filled with resumes. Most of the people I did not know. And she said, Randy, there's a lot of people that want to organize in Orange County. They just don't want you to. And I said, what does that actually mean? And so that's when I began this, I almost could call it a pursuit of greatness, because I knew what Trump could do. I had seen it. We'd all seen it on television, right? We'd all kind of admired him at afar. And there was also some envy and jealousy that went along with that for many people. Sure. Next thing I know, I'm the chairman. And the very first meeting we organized was in December of 2015. And we had over 100 people show up to that meeting. And in Orange County, when you think about the numbers, there's over 150,000 more Democrats than there are Republicans. There's more MPAs than there are Republicans. So to get that many people to come out to support him, I knew we were on to something. And so I actually picked from that file folder my entire team, my vice chairs, outreach chair, because I figured they have an interest. I need to make sure they become involved. And it was an incredible ride. We went we won the presidential preference primary. which they didn't think we, of course, could do. We got the number of delegates that we needed, and we go through and we win. And you would think that's the end of the story. We kind of went that night. I remember a local, all the media was there at the hotel that we were having the event at. And she came up to me, good friend of mine at a local station, and she wanted to interview me. And I literally couldn't. I've never seen a camera or microphone I don't love. So why could I not get through the interview? And I think it was because we had done so much to get to that point of winning. And it was actually just a bit overwhelming, probably more overwhelming than anything I've done in my life. I've done a lot of interesting things. And I thought, okay, this 2017 is going to come around. We're going to go to the inauguration, which I did. Great time. And I think now it's over, right? We prepare for 3 years from now. And it was never over. What happened then was that the media became his, as we had seen during the process, but even more of his Achilles heel. They were always on him everywhere we went. So I made a shift from dealing with what I call the local Tanya Harding politics to getting into fundraising. And very quickly, that became very easy for me in 2017 because I was going to Mar-a-Lago, I was going to all these events. 4 of the 5 pictures I have with President Trump are for fundraising. That's what this pen is for as well. And I'm not bragging about that. That's hard work. Fundraising, especially if it's not a career, which it really had not been for me, it was interesting. And so you kind of get wrapped up in the process of, Mar-a-Lago's cool, but so is President Trump. On the number of times, and outside of those photographs, I had the honor of meeting him different times. And, I remember the first time I met him in 2016, it was at the Central Florida event we had for him. And he walked up, and I was getting ready to get a picture, and he looked me in the eyes, and he goes, "How's it really going in Florida?" I don't remember what I said. I mean, in time, I would learn to answer that question much better. Sure. But it was so shocking to me that he intently looked at me and he was genuinely interested in what I had to say. And I was a little concerned at the beginning parts of 2016, mainly not because of him. I was worried about all the folks that, we now call them rhinos. It just flows off everyone's tongue, right? But there were a lot of Republicans that really resented how great he was doing. And so then, 2018 comes around, we're going to elect a governor, and wasn't that excited. We elected a senator, Senator Scott. And again, you think it's over. You think you've done your part. And then it's not. This is where I saw, though, a big shift in the local politics. They weren't real happy that a conservative gay guy had got us across the finish line in 2016. So by the time I'm leading into looking at 2020, they were literally doing everything they could to try to keep me from being part of that. The flip side of that is when you're in fundraising, Trump cares about one thing in life, I think, outside of his family, is do a good job. Otherwise, you're fired. And so I had figured out that magic potion when it came to fundraising because there were so many Republicans that simply didn't like traditional Republican candidates or processes. They wanted MAGA candidates. They wanted Trump. So fundraising, I was shocked how easy it was with him. So that's when I kind of shifted and started working with local candidates. In a town like ours, that's difficult, to even find a Republican. You cannot win in Orange County. I say this very strongly. I've said it many times. It's difficult to win in Orange County as a Republican. The numbers simply are not there.
Well, the sheriff kind of showed that. Mina?
Yes.
Mina, who I know, I'd never considered him a Democrat, but he ran on a Democrat ticket.
He had no choice.
And from what I understand, he's probably middle of the road. He probably has some left-leaning and right-leaning, but he has always identified in the past as a Republican.
Yeah, he went from being a Republican to, I believe, an independent, and then switched. Remember, that created the whole controversy with that one particular Democrat that had a huge criminal record that almost became our sheriff within a few thousand, what was it, 20,000 votes or something. It was ridiculous.
Too close to call.
Very close.
That's ridiculous when you start thinking of somebody with a criminal record that is now going to be the law enforcement leader of a county.
And ironically supported at the time by someone like Joel Greenberg, who, as we now know, the tax collector of Seminole County, has gone through his own battles and demons and will be in jail for a very long time. But, I think what I've learned through this whole process is you have to persevere. I tell, I wake up every day And except on Fridays. Fridays are weird days on social media. But every day I try to find something, and it might have been something I saw throughout the day that is going to inspire me to kick the day off. And I hope to inspire other people with that same type of motivation. And I know you do the same thing. That's one of the reasons I followed you on social media, is that you were always positive. You're not letting excuses get in the way of sometimes failing. Failing happens.
And part of it. Part of succeeding, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that's why people pay me now to help run their campaigns, because I made all these mistakes. So if you make mistakes, you might as well pay someone to make sure that you don't make the same ones.
Absolutely.
And so now we look at where we are today. And, a lot of people don't realize that I'm convinced that President Trump will run again for re-election. You don't run around doing these rallies at his age, getting the types of crowds he's getting, rain or shine. He's just a true patriot. And I think more importantly, he is fighting for this country. A lot of folks would like you to believe it's his ego and all of that. I think all of us would like to have our own helicopter and our own airplane and multiple estates and a beautiful wife and family. But when you get to meet those folks in private settings, like in fundraising things and such, you get to realize they're just normal people. I mean, one of the things I admire most about his kids is they always refer to him as my father. They're very respectful of him. And I think most of the Republicans that I interact with are the same way. One of the things I learned throughout this entire process is how important women are to the Republican Party.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I couldn't believe how many women I met that were carrying Second Amendment gun, they were ready. I remember this one lady that worked on the campaign, and she was probably in her 70s. And there was a rash of people being robbed at gas stations. And I said to her, just passing one day, I said, what would you do if somebody, and she goes, I'd pull my gun out and I would shoot them in the face. And I was like, okay. And she was being sincere. She wasn't laughing at me. She was probably surprised that I was kind of surprised at what she was saying.
Sure.
And I think that's where we are in this country right now. We're at a crossroads. And every time we hear about an election, we always hear, this is the one. This is the most important election of your lifetime.
It's always the most important.
It really is,
Yeah.
But certainly, we've normalized so many things in this country in recent time. And even as a gay person, I can say I don't think it's normal for men to be in women's sports. I don't think it's normal for men to be, walking around in dresses and all the time. And I love a great drag show. Don't get me wrong. There is nothing better, but that to me is entertainment. But when we start normalizing that behavior, and especially when we transcend that behavior to children, that's when I put the block on, and I'm like, okay, this is not okay.
It's really funny that you say that, because I have a lot of gay friends here in Orlando, and every single one of them are completely against this extreme agenda that the LGBTQ community is kind of pushing, with the almost like an indoctrination of children and the outwardness of all the transgenderism. And most of the gay community is not really with it. I'm noticing that more and more.
Well, I think they're finally getting strong enough to speak about it. You have to remember there's a couple of key points here. Equality Florida, HRC. These are fundraising arms of the gay community. They jump from one area to the next quite easily because of fundraising. But if you had 10 people sitting in this room right now that are gay, I would think it'd be hard to get one or two that are saying, I am all about the trans community. It's not about being against trans people. It is about trying to understand that really is not normal behavior, and like it or not, that's the facts. And I think a lot of gay people, that's why they're not marching in the streets for these issues. But some of these organizations I just mentioned, they want to align themselves, for example, with Black Lives Matter or some of these other groups. And, being black, and a former Miss America who happens to be black, who is a friend of mine, said to me once, Randy, you're never going to understand what it's like to be black, and I will never understand what it's like to be gay. So why are you trying to somehow really understand it? I can be empathetic and sympathetic to their causes.
Sure.
But when you start colliding all of this, bringing it all together, the reality is we are not quite the equal groups of people that we are. We are. I can tell if you're white. I can tell if you're black. I can, you're either a man or you're a woman. I mean, all this confusion and normalization. It's just like I watched last night. Finally, I watched 2,000 Mules. And that's been a question that's come up to me more times than I can imagine. You can believe that the president has spoken on.
And a lot of people don't know what 2,000 Mules is.
It's a documentary by Dinesh D'Souza, who I became a fan of a long time ago because he was doing a lot of things that really were more investigative. And it really wasn't his opinion. I mean, I've heard him speak in public. I've actually met him, and I realized he was trying just to educate us. Maybe what you're trying to do with your podcast. Kind of that, let's just have the conversation. 2,000 Mules then starts talking about what I consider to be concrete understanding of the voting irregularities that occurred in the 2020 process. Probably occurred many times before. Even our own Mayor, Buddy Dyer, at one point, I believe, got wrapped up in some entanglement when he first ran because of ballot harvesting and some of those issues, which I guess I was so focused in 2016 on the campaign, I never really took time to think, how are all these people voting? How is this all occurring? And I'm nothing against our president, but for all we know, there was some of that happening in 2016. Maybe the left didn't want Hillary to be the president. But when you take the 2020 election and you look at two of the least popular candidates out of the Iowa caucuses, and that was Biden and Harris, somehow becoming not only the nominee, but the winner of president and vice president of this country.
With the highest vote count in the history of voting.
The one thing about 2,000 Mules, and I'm not here to plug it, but we start really getting an understanding, not like, Rudy Giuliani and those folks were trying to get us to understand, because I think they just mismanaged their own PR. What you start looking at are the people that were taking multiple ballots to multiple locations. Mules, and a lot of people don't realize this, in the drug trade, mules are the people that bring the drugs across the border, right? In this case, the mules are the various folks, over 2,000 of them that they have identified, and they've got video documentation. It was so compelling that by the time it was over, I was angry again, But at the same time, I'm a little excited. A lot of people it may not understand that in a grassroots campaign like we had in 2016, until you are the nominee, you run your own campaign. That means you do your own fundraising, you hire your own staff. In 2020, the difference was the RECs, the Republican Executive Committees throughout the country, especially here in Florida, they are responsible for the reelection. So now what you have are a bunch of folks that really never really liked Trump to begin with.
Yeah, he's not very liked in the Republican Party still.
Well, because he has so much influence. When you pick all the winners in Indiana and Ohio in a recent process, you're either really good at sports betting or you know what you're doing.
Well, he's 44-0?
It's crazy.
Yeah, 40. I just saw this morning, 44-0 in his picks. And you know what? Before I forget about even asking about it, so recently, I think Biden from his own mouth said it, that Trump Republicans are called MAGA Republicans. The MAGA Republican movement is the most extreme political movement this country's ever seen. He actually said that out loud. And I was a little taken back by it. I'm like, the guy who was talking about unifying all the parties and unifying the people under his new regime and everything just says that out of nowhere.
Well, a MAGA Republican is different, I think, than a regular Republican. I get told all the time, well, you're in a cult or the red hat regime. Listen, there's nothing more fun to me than wearing one of my Trump shirts, and I have probably more than I care to mention, into Publix. And it's either a thumbs up or I voted for him. Some people are quiet about it.
Sure.
And I had this one lady during the pandemic, because I was an anti-mask person, unless I was taking my mom to the doctor where you had to do it, right?
Sure.
And this one lady, I'm in the wine section, of course, my favorite section of Publix. And I didn't have a mask on, and this lady, I did not have a Trump shirt on. And this lady just, shield on her face, mask, probably had 2 masks on. And she comes up to me and she goes, "You're a Trump supporter." And I said, "Really?" What do you mean? Because I wanted to kind of know where she was coming from. Well, you don't believe in masks. Well, she didn't realize I also didn't believe in the vaccine. However, I was going to a wedding in Nebraska right after Biden was elected, and I didn't want to get stuck in Nebraska for 2 weeks, so I did get the Johnson & Johnson shot. So she didn't know me well enough to make those assessments. The good news is this particular Publix, the manager is a Trump supporter as well, and he heard her and asked her to leave the store.
Yeah, I got berated one time. And I'm ex-law enforcement. I think you knew that from my social media. So I'm ex-law enforcement, so I can deal with conflict pretty well.
Right.
I was a cop for 12 years. I've been called every name in the book and more.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, in Cleveland and Clearwater. I don't think I'd want to be pulled
over by you.
I was a big intimidating cop back in the day. It was fun. So I'm in this grocery store, and this is maybe 4 months into the lockdowns, right? Maybe 6 months. So I'm in there. I never wore a mask. Not because I had any, political bias against it or anything like that, but because the science showed they actually don't prevent viral spread.
Sure.
It's literally on the side of the box. It literally says this will not protect against viruses.
Right.
So when everybody's wearing surgical masks, I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that. If I have an N95 and I'm going into a hostile area, if I'm going into a hospital chain where there's a COVID wing, yeah, I might throw on an N95 mask just so I don't get sick. I don't want to get the flu or the cold either.
Right.
So, I'm very logical when it comes to that. So I'm in this grocery store. The managers don't care. They're like, do your thing. There's nothing against the law. They can kick you out, but they didn't. And this person starts following me and videotaping. I'm talking 4 inches from my face. And following me, yelling at me, swearing at me. And I'm like, dude, what is your problem? And my wife's from New York.
Right.
So she grew up in New York. She's a little feisty, right? I can stay calm in situations. She gets a little feisty.
Right.
She starts going after. I'm like, don't worry about it. Just go over there. And, I told the guy, and I'm like, hey, man, just stop following me. I'm like, I'm not going to wear a mask. You're wearing your mask. You're safe. You're fine. Just stay 6 feet away like you're told to do, right? So he's following me, yelling at me, and this and that. So he gets his phone right in my face when I'm trying to leave. Snatched the phone out of his hand. And he's like, that's theft. I'm calling the cops. And I'm like, here's your phone back. Now it's not theft. Apparently he called the cops. The cops get there, and the whole thing is the cops are like, "What do you want us to do?
Sure.
We can't arrest him for that. There's nothing illegal happening.
Sure. And
he took your phone away from you because it was in his face, and he gave it back.
Right.
Respect people's privacy, respect people's space, and that kind of behavior is like almost anarchist behavior on behalf of what they were spreading on that side of the aisle.
Well, there's a great deal of hypocrisy between, the far right or the far left.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not sitting here today saying I'm not somewhat critical sometimes of the Republican Party. I think that we are sometimes weak. We don't fight as hard as we should. We write checks, and we think that because we're doing that, we're making a difference. You make a difference, and I'm also not a big fan of protest. I don't go participate in all those things, and I do believe, however, we can do a much better job organizing and trying more to get MAGA-style Republicans. They're the only ones I'll fundraise for because my fundraising base is all MAGA Republicans.
Now, what's your view? What's the difference between, in your view, what's the difference between a MAGA Republican and a normal Republican or a traditional Republican? Where do you see the main glaring differences in the two?
I think the Republican Party evolved thanks to Trump, but it was already on the way. You got to remember, part of the reason I think I was in the closet until I was, 36 years old is, coming from conservative Indiana. I believe that the Republican Party was teaching and preaching against homosexuality, same-sex marriage, some issues that I knew in the back of my mind were going to be issues I was going to be faced with at some point in my life. Listen, I'm all about same-sex marriage. It doesn't mean it's for me. But I am about the right for folks to get married. We see that happening greatly right now. This difference with the abortion issue and Roe versus Wade. I think a lot of people forget that in the 1973, when I was just a wee lad at 1973. I always kid about my age, but it's like we were in a different place in time.
Yeah.
And there was not social media pressure. So what you had is just marches and marches and marches of people. And so Roe versus Wade became an opportunity for the court to say, okay, we hear you, we think. By the time gay marriage came around, they had waited a very long time. But in all cases, I say the day of rabid activism are behind us. I can do as much impact on social media, coming on shows like yours, and talking about these issues as somebody that wants to go stand in the middle of the street and scream as loud as they can, looking sometimes like fools, to think they're accomplishing something. That's just not my style.
Well, also in '73, you had a mainstream media that was not overly as biased as it is now.
Correct.
So there was actually things being reported that were more factual than, it's almost all satire at this point. It's almost all opinion pieces. Where social media, you can get a true idea of what is being said, of what is being wanted by the general population.
And almost immediately. Last night, I sometimes still watch 60 Minutes. It's funny, I hated that show growing up. But now I watch, and there was a point in time where I was watching it because I thought there was quality in it. Last night they had a gentleman on there, a former defense folk person for Trump, and he was just bashing him. And I thought, where are all these people getting off bashing? It's like Omarosa and all these different folks. Listen, you worked luckily for one of the best presidents we've ever had, and now you want to capitalize off of your experience to trash him. I find it disrespectful. I literally turned the channel because the lady that was doing the interview, she was guiding him to be a Trump hater.
Of course.
They loved it. The View is one of the worst shows on television, should be taken off. I cannot believe they get sponsors. I care for my mom, so she's in the other room sometimes, and I'm in my office because I work from home, and I'll hear that show on. And I've got a whole, little bin of socks. And I'll just throw them at the television. It's my safest way throughout the last 5 years to survive without going nuts, because I'll see some of this stuff and I'm just like, how can you say that? And then they'll have a Republican on there, they think, providing the conservative opinion, and just a woman that hates Trump.
Yeah.
They haven't really, found someone that was willing to fight against them. And when they do, they get rid of them.
Yeah.
And that to me is another example of how the media at every angle, especially even locally, even the local reporters that I know that are conservative, you'll never know it. They're so afraid to talk about it. Whenever the Orlando Sentinel calls me for a quote on something, I have to give them credit for the call. But often the way it gets kind of dissected back doesn't make me sometimes come off as, being sane. That's the only way I know how to say.
Well, you said you're basically the most hated gay man in Orlando at this point.
I think when I took on this role, you don't realize I had gotten death threats. My family has gotten death threats. Don't you dare come to the Pride Parade. This would have been 2016. This is right around Pulse. A lot of people don't realize, and it's funny because, I know the owners of Pulse. I'd only been there a few times, but that kind of part of my life was kind of, getting out of the party scene.
Sure.
So I remember waking up to all these helicopter noises because I live right downtown, and people texting me and calling me, and I'm like, are you okay? Are you okay? As if I was hanging out there on a regular basis, right? And of course, days following that, we would learn what actually happened. A lot of people still don't want to acknowledge that it wasn't just Pulse that, this terrorist looked at. He looked at Disney Springs. He looked at other places. About 3 weeks after that, President Trump wanted to come into Orlando, then elect, he was the nominee at that point.
Yeah.
And so I contacted, and I can say it now publicly, I've said it publicly before, Mayor Jacobs, who I always considered a friend, known her since 2000. I called up her office, and she knew that we were trying to do this because he wanted to come in to visit the site. He wanted to pay tribute to what had occurred. It was not a political angle. As a matter of fact, the only thing we requested from her is that she meet him on the tarmac. She is a Republican, and he was at that point going to be the nominee. And she deliberately, and I remember it quite distinctly, she said, if you continue this, I will contact then Governor Scott, and I will make sure that this doesn't occur. And I was so I couldn't, I had going back to the campaign and saying, this guy you've hired, which by the way, chairman is free. I worked for free, so it's not like I was paid $1 million. I can get so many things done in this town. I can't do this. They won't budge. Yeah. And so finally he backed away. But it would be then we would see President Obama, then Vice President Biden. And then ironically, there's Hillary Clinton coming in, and everybody's just spooning and fawning over her. And once again, it reminded me that they did not realize what level of effort we had gone through to try to get him to be able to come in and pay his respects. He was going to be the Republican nominee for president. And in the end, he became president. So why did we want to create that adversarial relationship? I can tell you that the gay community still believes that Trump is bad.
Why is that, though? I know what they say about him. I know what political opposition says about President Trump, that he's racist, he's a bigot, he's a womanizer, he's all these things, right? according to them, with very little proof to show for it. So what do you tell people in the gay community? So in the gay community or in any of the minority communities, what do you tell them when they start giving you these talking points about Trump? Because 99% of them are not true.
Yeah.
And when before he ever walked down those stairs, before he ever came down that escalator at his hotel to announce he was running, he was revered. He was loved by the left.
Oh, sure.
And he was, I still don't even think he's actually a true conservative Republican. I think he's pretty much right in the middle.
Right.
But the middle has shifted quite drastically. I think he's right in the middle, and he was loved by the left. And then as soon as he became a political adversary, he was demonized left and right. So what do you tell people?
Well, my boss on the campaign was a lesbian in a 14-year relationship. There were a lot of gay people that worked then and now for President Trump. Like it or not, we get stuff done, but I think it's a difficult conversation because most won't listen. They forget he's one of the, if not the only Republican president nominee that on stage during his acceptance mentioned the LGBTQ plus, take the alphabet the way you want to go, community. Why is that being forgotten? That to me was a huge stride in the right direction. When he gave Rick Grinnell the opportunity to be an ambassador, those are huge strides, and we should be celebrating those strides. And instead, I think the gay community has literally locked itself into believing that only Democrats can help them. I know libertarian gay people, across the board, there's all kinds of different folks, but one of the best parts of my role, I think today, is that I get so many people that reach out to me that are gay. Thank you for being loud. Thank you for making me feel like I'm not nuts, that it's okay to be a conservative. Because he never did anything, and he knew, look at the hair. He had to know I was gay. But it's not something we talked about, right?
That's fantastic. So we're clear.
No, it had to be something that was out there, and he just didn't care. And I still to this day will tell you, I don't think he gives one iota about sexual orientation from a perspective of getting the job done. And so I think that we have to give him credit for being that kind of open. Keep in mind, he's an entertainer. He's worked in the entertainment industry. How can you work in the entertainment industry and not be surrounded by some gay people?
Sure.
But, from my own experience, never once was my sexual orientation brought up. Never once was it an issue. I do recall getting into a heavy debate once with someone who might consider themselves to be a local Democrat gay influencer, and said that, I remember it distinctly, this real long diatribe on social. Does somebody know Randy's parents or his sister or somebody? He's having clearly a mental breakdown by supporting this man because it's not normal.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, what does that mean? What do you mean? You think I'm crazy because I support this man's politics and this man's vision for our country? Listen, we were not at war under Trump. We are literally at war, whether people want to acknowledge it right now by picking a side. Yeah. And we have picked a side. We are at war.
Our economy is in shambles. Our taxes are through the roof. Inflation is here, whether or not anybody believes the numbers on the media. The numbers are drastically higher. I can see it. I can feel it. I'm a business owner. I'm an entrepreneur. I see what is going on in the economy because I see it with all of my vendors, with everything involved. So under Trump, it was much different. Gas prices were low. Inflation was low. Things were affordable. Housing was affordable. Now, under Biden, I see the economy completely reversed from what it was under Trump. Now, people will automatically say, well, that's just the times, that's because of Russia, that's because of this. Now, in your opinion, because you're in politics, is this to blame on Biden, or is this just the time? Is this just the circumstances? Because Afghanistan withdrawal was a disaster. We lost billions there and lives. Nobody talked about that for more than 2 days.
Right.
Now we're openly in basically conflict with Russia, which is not a smart move to make.
No, it's not.
Sending billions and billions to Ukraine, which again, my opinions on Ukraine, love the Ukrainian people, have a bunch of Ukrainian friends. That entire regime and government has been corrupted for generations. It's a cesspool of corruption over there. Everybody knows it that pays attention.
Sure.
So from your view, knowing you have these kind of like ins in politics, who's to blame for all this? Who's to blame for all the Americans suffering with all the inflation, with all the woes?
If you think about what the Biden administration did almost immediately, they reversed so many of the Trump policies. Mm-hmm. We went from being energy independent to energy dependent. Mm-hmm. I often think a lot of these things are just to keep us distracted from what's happening at the southern border. Thank God for, Governor DeSantis and keeping, what I say, a heavy hand and laying down the law for Florida, because we could easily be a place where they just want to drop people off. Mm-hmm. I feel for the people of Texas, because that's really where a lot of this activity is taking place. But, I believe it was Vice President Harris was put in charge of the southern border. From that date forward, you don't ever hear about it. Mm-hmm. What we heard about were the gates and the fences that actually Obama put in place, not Trump. We heard about all these people being taken from their children, and it's not like that. America was great under Trump, but you need do nothing else but go put gas in your car or go to the grocery store to see what is happening to this country. We are operating under Trump. We will operate better again. I am confident that not only if the election is handled right with integrity, he's going to be president again if he wants it, right? Because I think the last thing we need is for our great governor to leave and become his vice president.
One of my biggest fears.
Yeah, because
one of my biggest fears is DeSantis going into the White House early and us not having someone to run this state, because this really is the last haven.
It is.
In my opinion. There's a reason that people are fleeing New York, fleeing California, fleeing the West Coast in general, and moving to more conservative states. And I've had several people call me, text me, message me on social media. Social media, I get blown up. Anytime I post anything political, I'm either getting blocked and sworn at, or I'm getting messages saying like, yeah, bro, I was wrong.
Right.
I was wrong. I voted wrong.
Well, assuming that they actually voted, it's one of those weird spaces that we're in right now, because I don't think anybody would have thought how bad it was going to get. We knew it wasn't going to be great, but we didn't see how bad it was going to be. When I talk to folks that have moved here from California or New York, I'm fine with that as long as they don't bring their politics. What is it? 1,000 people a week are moving to Florida, some crazy number. You can't buy a house here. Normal people cannot buy a house in
Rent is through the roof.
Rent is through the roof. I don't believe in rent control, by the way. I think what we have to understand is, it's popular because we stood up for ourselves in the state of Florida. It's popular to be in Florida because of our governor listening to his folks and the science that was conflictive with what was happening out of D.C. We should have never been in masks that long. Remember 2 weeks to flatten the curve? Yeah. Wasn't that what we were being preached to? And so I look at it and say the Democrats have shown their hand, and it's not a winning hand. I think that you're going to find Democrats, hopefully a lot of independents, because that's where the real win's going to take place, supporting not only Governor DeSantis but Trump in 2024. My biggest fear is keeping them both safe. You have to think about that when you've got so many crazy folks out there that would love to be the one that takes one of those folks down. These amazing leaders. So when I look at, I'm an optimist in general. I want to see the positive, but when I see how our country's being managed, it is concerning. You said in the break, you talked about how you and your wife want to have a baby. I'd hate to be in your position of trying to raise a child in this environment that takes parental rights away. Just like when the governor signed the parental rights bill, and all of a sudden it was the Don't Say Gay bill, even though the word gay isn't even mentioned in the bill.
I'm still baffled by the entire argument from the other side of the aisle on that one. You and I can talk about politics legitimately. We can probably do a 5-hour podcast about this, and we can go on and on. One of my next guests that I'm going to have on here in the coming weeks is going to be somebody I'm hoping in your exact position, but from the other side of the aisle.
Have fun with that.
So I'm excited. And again, I'm more libertarian, I think, than anything. I believe in very small government. I believe in, kind of leave me alone, let me do my thing. Which is what I believe most people should be. I don't care what your sexual orientation is. I don't care what you want to do with your life. I don't care where you want to live. everybody do their thing.
Right.
You know, pay your taxes, which are too high.
Yeah.
IRS.
Orange County, 1%,
Orange
not
County.
1 penny.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
get that confused.
Yeah. So, you know, I really appreciate you coming on here,
Thank
giving
you.
us your perspective, and it is very unique. You know, being in your position, being in the Republican Party, and being a Trump supporter, I mean, it's honorable because I think that you are really kind of serving everybody with logic,
Right.
and not with emotion.
Right.
And I think logic needs to prevail in the next political conversations, in the next elections. I think everybody that's voting needs to be really more logical than emotional.
Well, have me back anytime you want, and we'll talk about whatever the Democrats talked about.
I would love to do a follow-up with you after I have that conversation.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. I
Thank you so
appreciate
much
the
for coming
opportunity.
on.
Thanks.